Tonight, the Republican candidates in the Ohio Senate primary square off in their first statewide debate. Mike Gibbons, Josh Mandel, J.D. Vance, Matt Dolan, and Jane Timken. From your local election headquarters, this is the Senate debate for the Ohio Republican primary.
And thank you for joining us live from Cleveland, Ohio for this very special night of political conversation and debate ahead of Ohio's primary election. I'm Wayne Dawson in the studios of WJW-TV Fox 8, and you are watching this on air or online from one of 5 Nexstar media stations across the state of Ohio. We are broadcasting live from Cleveland to Columbus, Dayton, Youngstown, and Steubenville, plus a partner station in Cincinnati. You've met the 5 candidates taking part in tonight's debate. Now let's meet the moderators. Colleen Marshall from NBC4 in Columbus and Joe Toohey from Fox 8 right here in Cleveland.
Good evening, everyone. And here's a quick rundown of the rules for our debate so you at home know what to expect.
Each candidate will get 60 seconds to answer a question. If there's a follow-up or rebuttal, the candidate will have 30 seconds to answer that, and then 15 seconds for clarification if needed.
And we will be reminding the candidates throughout the night of those times. The sound of a bell will ring when their time is up.
Now, before we get to anything else, we do need to address what happened Friday night at a candidate forum.
If you missed it, take a look. Here's what happened.
Don't.
I do.
You've never been in the private sector in your
All right, gentlemen. I've worked, sir.
Josh. Squat. About
2 tours in Iraq. Don't tell me I haven't worked. Don't tell me I haven't worked.
You don't know squat.
It's okay, right?
You don't know squat.
2 tours in Iraq. Don't tell me I haven't worked.
Back off, buddy. You're gonna
You back off.
Come on. Never that'll happen.
Sit down.
Now, this event involved Josh Mandel and Mike Gibbons, and that's who we want to hear from. Josh Mandel, can you explain to us in 30 seconds what happened that night?
I'm a fighter, I'm a Marine, and I'll never back down from a fight. The problem in Washington is that we have all these squishy rhino Republicans. They've taken a knee for the Democrats, and they've taken a knee for the media, and when I go to Washington, I will be the worst nightmare of the radical left and of the squishy rhino Republicans as well. We can't afford to send weak and soft Republicans to Washington. Now is the time for fighters. I will fight like heck to defend you when I'm in the U.S. Senate.
And Mr. Gibbons, 30 seconds for you as well, if you would like to explain what happened Friday night.
We had a disagreement over what the private sector is. I think Josh seems to think that his military service. And by the way, I have a son that's a Navy pilot. We just visited him. He was leaving for deployment. I have nothing but respect for everybody that serves in the military. My point was that Josh has never been in the private sector. The military is not the private sector. The private sector is what operates in this country and makes the economy we have.
Thank you, Mr. Gibbons.
Okay, candidates, now we do want to get to the issues tonight. Mike Gibbons, you are up first. Polling determines the order. Tonight, Ohioans are struggling with gas prices and inflation. You're all unanimous in saying that President Biden is at fault. What we'd like to hear from you tonight is one specific solution that you would pursue as senator that could lower gas prices for Ohioans. Mike Gibbons, you have 60 seconds.
When Donald Trump left office, we were energy independent. Over the period of time he left office and where we are now, we're producing 400 million gallons less in the U.S. in oil. The oil is a world market. When that oil is no longer produced, prices go up. Joe Biden ran on the idea that we're going to eliminate the fossil fuel industry. When entrepreneurs and owners of fossil fuel companies hear that the president wants them out of business, they don't make the kind of investments, they don't take the kind of risk they would take normally, and they stop producing, which you would do also. Joe Biden caused the increase in gasoline prices, which was happening well before Vladimir Putin put 190,000 people, actually 190,000 soldiers on the Ukraine border. That's what caused the increase in gas prices.
But it could, if a follow-up, if I may, a specific solution that could help lower them.
Let's start producing oil and gas again.
Thank you, Mr. Gibbons. Mr. Vance, same question to you. You have 60 seconds. One solution to address high gas prices.
Yeah, look, I just want to address the thing that happened earlier, because what really annoyed me is that, Josh is a former Marine. I myself served in the Marine Corps for 4 years, and I hate when people use the Marine Corps as a political football. I don't know why you use the Marine Corps every single time you attack Josh. It's kind of ridiculous. Let's talk about the issues. So on the issue of energy, two issues, actually, two ideas that I have. First of all, you need to open up the Keystone XL pipeline, because that will mean more oil and gas coming into our country from a country, by the way, Canada, which is a friendly and environmentally conscious country, instead of Iran, Venezuela, Russia, all of the garbage countries that Joe Biden wants to go to for oil. The other thing we need to do is make it illegal for corporate shareholders in this country to use their progressive social values and project them on the rest of the economy. The reason we have an oil and gas shortage is a lot of investors won't put money into oil and gas, which would create a lot of good Ohio jobs and make gas prices go down, because they've imported progressive politics into the modern economy. We've got to stop that from happening. We're not just going to lose the oil and gas issue. We're going to lose the entire modern capitalist economy that produces a lot of prosperity for our people.
Thank you, Mr. Vance. Mr. Dolan, same question to you. 60 seconds.
Thank you. I'm not surprised this is the first question tonight. Everywhere I go in Ohio, people are frustrated about gas prices, about the cost of goods, the cost of groceries. This started on day one of the Biden administration, when he doesn't understand the basic economics of demand and supply. On day one, he reduced the supply of gas and oil coming from America. Not only did that cause gas prices to go up, but it also lost American jobs, and now we have to go to our enemies, Venezuela, Iran, OPEC, to get our gas. How you change this is you get the supply side. You get people back working. You don't have a federal government that's disincentivizing people to stay home. You make sure that American jobs are back and working. You do not provide checks to people to stay home. When you get the supply chains moving again, when you get people back to work, that creates a pressure, a downward pressure that will help Ohioans have lower prices for gas and for the groceries.
Thank you, Mr. Dolan. Jane Timken, same question to you.
Yes.
60 seconds.
Well, first of all, I'd like to address the embarrassment of Friday evening. Josh Mandel and Mike Gibbons acted like children, and if I had been their mother, I would have grounded them. I'm a mom on a mission to take this country back. And you asked the question about soaring gas prices. I was in the trenches fighting for President Trump's America First agenda, and that was the time when we were energy independent in this country. No longer. And it's because of Joe Biden, the Democrats' failed policies. They literally said they want to eliminate the fossil fuel industry in this country. We have 250,000 jobs right here in Ohio tied to the oil and gas industry. There is no reason that our country should be begging other countries for oil and gas. As a mom, I know what it's like to fill up your gas tank, to buy groceries. This is harming those who can least afford it. It will be a priority of mine in the U.S. Senate to get us back to energy independence and stop the Democrats' attacks on our oil and gas industry.
Thank you. Josh Mandel, same to you. 60 seconds.
Well, part of the problem is that the Democrats, Biden, Pelosi, Schumer, when they think of oil and gas and energy, they think in terms of spreadsheets and bar charts. But in reality, these are policies that are impacting people's lives. I talked to senior citizens on fixed incomes all over the state. I was talking to a senior citizen named Sally the other day. I ran into her at IHOP, and she's having trouble affording to fill up her gas tank. Same way I ran into a veteran who's a truck driver in Cleveland, and he was telling me the same thing. So what can we do about it? We should be drilling for all the oil and gas we can here in America. In fact, if you took the state of Ohio, the state of West Virginia, and the state of Pennsylvania, our three states, and combine them into a region, that region would be the third largest producer of natural gas in the world. So instead of depending on radical Muslim countries like Saudi Arabia, instead of depending on thugs like Putin and Russia, we should depend on ourselves, Ohio, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, America, drill for oil and gas here to bring down the costs for senior citizens on fixed incomes and for families throughout our state.
Thank you, Mr. Mandel.
And now, candidates, we are going to talk about Ukraine. All of you have criticized President Biden and his handling of that situation. The question is, what are we going to do about it? Mr. Mandel, you're up first with this question. Ohio, home to one of the largest populations of Americans of Ukrainian descent. You've said the president is too late in his response, but at this juncture, what role should the U.S. play? You have 60 seconds.
Well, there's a tiny sliver of the Republican Party very small, that just says, hey, who cares about Ukraine? I think they're out of touch, and they're totally wrong. It's bad public policy. We should care about what's happening there because Vladimir Putin is a thug. He is an authoritarianism. He's a leader in authoritarianism, and all he wants to do is focus on the rise of Russia, the rise of communist China, and the downfall of America. So what can we do about it? We should be sending Avengers, Patriots, all different types of defense systems over there. We should be sending tactical radios over there. It's embarrassing how Kamala Harris and Joe Biden completely screwed up the deal with Poland and the MiGs, and we should be doing everything we can to ensure that the Ukrainians can defend themselves. Now listen, I've served in war in the Marines. I've done my small part. So many of your sons and daughters have as well. We should not be sending our boys and girls over there, but we should be sending our defense systems so innocent women and children and families, Ukrainians, can defend themselves.
I do have a quick 15-second follow-up for you, Mr. Mandel. The Ukrainians have asked for a no-fly zone. President Zelensky says he's desperate for one. 15 seconds, yes or no, would you support the no-fly zone?
If the Europeans can create a no-fly zone, but I do not think we should be putting American boys and girls in the air, because if that happens, they have to be prepared to have air fights with the Russian MiGs, and at the end of the day, we don't want to put our boys and girls up in the air to get in firefights with Russian fighters.
Thank you, Mr. Mandel. Mr. Gibbons, you're up next. You grew up in Parma, which is the largest Ukrainian population in the state of Ohio. I imagine you must have built some strong relationships there over the years. So how will that impact what you think should be the next step for us in Ukraine? 60 seconds.
I think much as Josh said, as you've said, I did grow up in Parma. It is heartbreaking talking to my friends of Ukrainian descent what they're going through right now. A lot of them have relatives in the Ukraine, and you can see that any news report shows people dying. It's very much like World War II, and I think we dithered while Ukraine was under potential invasion. I think you don't send 190,000 troops around the border and think they're there for summer camp. We should have been sending armaments in there. I think we need to arm them to the teeth, absolutely to the teeth, just as Josh said. They need Patriots. They've got to be able to shoot these missiles down. That's causing the most damage. We need to support them. I don't want to see American soldiers' boots on the ground in Ukraine. And it's, as I said, it's personal. I don't want my son flying around the Ukraine.
A 15-second follow-up for you as well. Would you support that no-fly zone?
If the Europeans do it, but it can't be American pilots.
Thank you, Mr. Gibbons. Mr. Vance, you are up next. What is your view? What should the next steps for the U.S. be in this crisis? 60 seconds.
So first of all, we should absolutely not support a no-fly zone. What a no-fly zone, it sounds nice, like we asked the Russians not to fly planes over Ukraine. What it means in practice is American Marine Corps pilots, Air Force pilots, and Navy pilots getting in dogfights with Russian jets. Which the problem with that is it's not in our vital national interest. I'm in the minority up here because at the end of the day, we can accept as individuals, look, it's tragic, it's terrible. What Vladimir Putin did was wrong in invading a sovereign country on his border, but we have our own problems in the United States to focus on. I'm very distressed, frankly, that for 4 years, congressional Republicans refused to give Donald Trump $4 billion for a border wall. $4 billion for a border wall when fentanyl is pouring into our country, killing our citizens by the tens of thousands. In 1 week, they gave Joe Biden $14 billion for Ukrainian aid. What I would do in this moment is condition further Ukrainian aid on support for our border and support for our problems. People always say we can walk and chew gum at the same time. Let's actually do it if we're going to do it.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Vance. On to you, Mr. Dolan. You've called Vladimir Putin's actions in Ukraine disgusting. You say America needs to be stronger. What more would you like to see the United States do in Ukraine? 60 seconds.
To be clear, I'm the only one that said that Donald Trump's statement about calling Putin a genius and savvy was disgusting. No one else on the stage even has the guts to stand up to that. We need to make sure that Ukraine has the humanitarian aid and the military aid that they need to defend themselves. But what I will never do is accept that anyone on this stage is going to say to the Ukrainian people, we don't care about you. We're standing 12 miles from where my wife and I prayed and rallied with the Ukrainians because they were fighting for liberty and their lives. Imagine how Putin must feel when a candidate for the United States Senate is saying, I don't care that you invade a country. I don't care that you're committing war crimes. Well, JD, I think you have the opportunity now to apologize to my friends, the Ohio Ukrainians, because you have caused them additional pain, additional sorrow at a time when it's very, very difficult for them. We must stand up for Ukraine, and I will never, ever say that we can do two things at once in America, and I will never leave people behind.
Mr. Dolan, thank you. I do want to give you 15 seconds, Mr. Vance, to reply to that since he called you out directly.
Well, it's interesting to hear a lecture on strength from a guy who changed the name of the Cleveland Indians to the Cleveland Guardians, which of course was a joke. I never said I don't care about the people of Ukraine. I said the matter of what happens to Ukraine is not in our vital national interest. It's statesmanship to separate your emotions as a personal matter from what we should do as public policy. That's all it is.
Well, JD, when you parachute back into
10
Ohio,
seconds,
you don't
sir.
understand that there are tens of thousands of Ukrainian people whose families and relatives are being killed. And as a U.S. Senator, I'm going to stand up for them, and I'm also going to make sure America can do two things at once.
Thank you,
Matt,
Mr. Dolan. We are going to move on now. We have to move on. You've had your time, and we're going to move on to Ms. Timken. Ms. Timken, you've said Americans are less safe because of Joe Biden. Where should the U.S. go from here when it comes to Ukraine? 60 seconds.
Yes. Well, I, as a mother, watching Vladimir Putin bomb a maternity ward and children dying in the streets of Ukraine, my heart breaks. And as I said, I'm a mom on a mission to take our country back. As your U.S. Senator, my priority is the safety and security of American families. Joe Biden's weakness has invited Putin's aggression. Look, we should have been putting sanctions on Russia long before the invasion. Joe Biden did not do that. Ukrainians were asking for weapons. We weren't providing them. It is Biden's basement diplomacy that is leading to this aggression. We need people who understand that we can do both. Donald Trump did it. I was Donald Trump's Ohio Republican chairman fighting for the America First policies. He secured the southern border and had peace through strength. Vladimir Putin did not invade Ukraine under President Trump. And look, JD, you said, I don't care one way or another what happens in Ukraine.
I want to ask you a quick follow-up as well. Would you support the no-fly zone? 15 seconds, yes or no?
We should not have American pilots flying in Ukraine. What we should be doing is providing the MiGs from Poland that Vladimir Zelensky has requested. That is peace through strength. We need to make sure that they have the lethal weapons they need to defend Ukraine's sovereignty.
Thank you, Ms. Timken. We are sticking with Ukraine, and I have a follow-up, a 30-second follow-up for you, Mr. Mandel. You're endorsed by a congressman, Congressman Cawthorn, who called Ukrainian President Zelensky a thug. Do you agree with that? 30 seconds.
I fundamentally disagree with it. I think the thug in this conflict, in this war, is Vladimir Putin. People forget, Vladimir Putin was the KGB station chief in East Germany when the wall fell. The KGB station was surrounded, and he was embarrassed for his life and embarrassed for his mother Russia. And since that day, he hated President Reagan and hated us. Everyone here watching at home, and me, our families, everyone on this stage, Putin hates us. He hates America. Putin is the enemy.
Thank you, Mr. Mandel. Mr. Gibbons, J.D. Vance has said your response to Ukraine and the situation there would be, quote, America last. Why is he wrong? 30 seconds.
I think you look at the history of invasions over the last several hundred years. It's obvious, and you listen to what Vladimir Putin says, and we better start listening to what Vladimir Putin says. I think this isn't his first invasion. We have to support the Ukraine. We have to make sure that Ukraine wins this war. We cannot have Vladimir Putin enthusiastic about what he did in the Ukraine and move on to Poland or move on to the Baltic states. So
Thank you, Mr. Gibbons. Mr. Vance, some of this has been brought up already, but you have said, and I'm quoting here, I don't really care what happens to Ukraine one way or another. But isn't it the job of a United States Senator to care about our allies and our foreign policy? 30 seconds.
Look, To be clear again, I said I don't care about it relative to other interests that are in our vital national security interest, our southern border crisis, our inflation crisis. These are much bigger problems for the leaders of this country. And look, we have to be statesmen about this. What is happening is, of course, a tragedy. But how does it affect the vital national interests of this country? All of these guys have said in some variety that we should be doing something. Well, does that something mean getting ourselves involved in a war in Ukraine? Because this nonstop escalation will eventually lead there if we're not smart about it.
Thank you, Mr. Vance. Mr. Dolan, President Biden has committed to protecting our NATO allies. There's been fighting within 15 miles of the border with Poland. Given that, at what point would you support sending American troops into the conflict? And you have 30 seconds.
Well, first of all, on the no-fly zone, I'm not for it now. But as a U.S. Senator, you engage with your generals, you engage with intelligence to find out if it would actually work. But you run the risk of a hot war with Russia. So our responsibility, as tragic as it is to keep that conflict contained. And if it ebbs into NATO allies, we have a responsibility to defend them. So that's why I am for giving Ukrainians the military, the aid that they need to defend themselves.
Thank you, Mr. Dolan. Ms. Timken, the current Senator, Rob Portman, has endorsed you. He went to Poland and he said what Ukrainians want is fighter jets. Is that something you would support? 30 seconds.
Absolutely, I would support it. And the reason why this is in our national security interest is because Xi Jinping is watching the Americans' response to Vladimir Putin's aggression. And as I said, Joe Biden's weakness invited Putin into Ukraine. We had peace through strength under President Trump. And as you know, he endorsed me to be chair of the Ohio Republican Party. I spent 150,000 miles in my car fighting for that America First agenda, talking to Ohio families. You know who I didn't see? Josh Mandel, Mike Gibbons, or J.D. Vance.
Thank you, Ms. Timken. Candidates, we are going to move on. We are going to switch gears here. Looming large in this race is the role of former President Donald Trump. In fact, in our latest poll, nearly 62% of Ohio's Republican primary voters say an endorsement from the former president would make them more likely to vote for one of you. He shows up in many of your ads. Many of you have invoked his name already tonight. We're going to ask each of you about your views on former President Trump. But Mr. Vance, we do begin with you. You've admitted you've changed your mind on Donald Trump, but in the past you've said, quote, "I'm a never Trump guy," quote, "My God, what an idiot," and quote, "God wants better of us," all statements you have either said or tweeted about Donald Trump at some point. The question, you have 60 seconds, why should Trump voters, Trump supporters, vote for you?
Yeah, look, I mean, all of us say stupid things, and I happen to say stupid things very publicly. You know, I've been very public about the fact that I voted for the president in 2020, that I was wrong about the president back in 2015, 2016, and that he's been the greatest president of my lifetime for the very simple reason, there are many, but one very important reason is that he revealed the corruption in Washington, D.C. I mean, who would have believed 5 years ago, 6 years ago, that the FBI would actually investigate illegally, get an illegal wiretap on a sitting U.S. presidential candidate. We saw that. Trump revealed it, and he revealed it in a way that showed us the stakes of the fight, which is why I'm running for this office in the first place. You know, one thing I'd point out is that, you know, I was just north of 30 years old when I said a lot of those things. A lot's changed in my life. I re-engaged with my faith. I got baptized 3 years ago. I've had 3 kids since then. You know, a lot's different. And one of the things that's different is that I did change my mind about Donald Trump. He was a great president. And I think at the end of the day, one of the things this race presents is an opportunity. Who actually agrees with Trump on the core issues of trade, of immigration? Who's willing to fight for an America First foreign policy? I think that's clearly me.
Thank you, Mr. Vance. We're going to move on to Mr. Dolan. Mr. Dolan, you're the only candidate in this race Donald Trump has weighed in on and said he will not be endorsing. The question, can you win an Ohio Republican primary without the former president's support?
Well, of course I can win. I'm sure the president's too busy to look at my record. But since I've been in this race, I've made it all about Ohio and making sure Ohio is strong, making sure America is strong. The irony of this whole thing is I'm the only one on this stage who's actually implemented Republican Trump ideas. I've reduced your taxes. I've reduced regulations. I've expanded school choice so parents have a chance to decide how and where their child gets educated. I have supported the police. I have invested in mental health. I have invested in our water for economic development. These are all things that Republicans want to see happen, and Donald Trump saw happening, and we were successful. Because when you run a campaign, it's about you, Ohio. I'm going to Washington to fight for you. I'm going to Washington to fight for your international security, your national security, your community security, and your financial security. President Trump wants to join someone who's put his policies in place. I'm happy to have him. But I know Ohioans at the end of the day are going to support somebody who can execute on Republican ideas.
Thank you, Mr. Dolan. Ms. Timken, next question is for you. In 2016, Donald Trump backed you for Republican Party chair. This time around, he has weighed in on Ohio congressional races. He's weighed in on Senate races across the country. He has yet to weigh in on this race. Why have you not gotten the endorsement this time around?
Well, I would welcome President Trump's endorsement, and as you said, President Trump endorsed and supported me to be chair of the Republican Party. Look, there's a lot of people who are all talk in this race. There's a lot of show horses. I'm a workhorse. I have the grit and grace to get things done, and as chair of the Republican Party, there was no one else championing President Trump's America First agenda more than me. I was out there on the front lines, putting 150,000 miles in my car, speaking at rallies, writing op-eds, talking to the media about President Trump's America First policies that were working for Ohio families, border security, American jobs, energy independence. Those are the things that I've spent the last 5 years talking about. I would welcome President Trump's endorsement, but I'm working every day to earn the support of the Ohio Republican voters. I have been in the trenches fighting for Ohio families. No one has spent more time with Ohio's families, farmers, businesses, and communities. The question is, who do you trust to go to Washington, D.C. and fight for you? We saw two people get on the stage and fight for themselves on Friday.
Thank you, Ms. Timken. I'm going to move on. Mr. Mandel, Donald Trump has said over and over again he likes to pick winners. As we've established, he has not picked anyone in this race yet. Are you worried he doesn't think you can win?
I'm doing everything I can to earn his support. I hope I earn his support. I'd be honored to earn his support. Listen, on this stage, there's a lot of good people up here. I will tell you this, though. My friends on stage here, they're deal cutters. They'll cut deals with Democrats in Washington. They'll cut deals with the media in Washington. They'll cut deals with squishy rhino Republicans. Like Donald Trump, I will not. I am a fighter. I am steel-spined. You know, the Republican Party bosses in Columbus and in Washington, they criticize me. They say, Josh Mandel is too hard right. He's too America first. I don't think there's a such thing. I think there's a fork in the roads right now in the Republican Party. Down one fork goes these squishy rhino establishment Republicans, Mitt Romney, Anthony Gonzalez, Liz Cheney. We need to eradicate them from the Republican Party. I'm taking a different path. I'm going to Washington to be reinforcements for fighters. Fighters like Ted Cruz, Jim Jordan, and Donald Trump. I am going to Washington to fight for you and fight for your family. No one will push me around.
Thank you, Mr. Mandel. Mr. Gibbons, next question is for you. In an interview last year, you said, quote, I am a Trump supporter, but I am not into the cult of personality. The question, what do you mean by that? Do you believe Donald Trump supporters are in a cult? You have 60 seconds.
First of all, I've supported Donald Trump in 16 and through 20. I have to call foul on Jane Timken. I was Trump's Ohio finance co-chair in 2016. I raised a good deal of money for him. Between the elections, I formed a PAC and gave speeches all over the state in support of him, largely talking to Republican women's groups, talking to them about what he had done and accomplished, not necessarily what he said. I worked for him, and I might add, I worked without pay. Jane was paid a couple $100,000 and her gas money to travel around the state, and I might add that gave her the opportunity to run for this office right now. When I said that, it was out of context. The context was that if Donald Trump doesn't run, we can't be left in the lurch without another candidate.
I'd like to respond to Mike Gibbons. Mike,
I'm going to give you 15 seconds to respond. Go ahead, Mr. Timken.
Mike, I meant what I said. I never saw you. I only saw you at fundraisers. And look, I spent the first 6 months of working at the Ohio Republican Party for no pay. It's because I believe in these policies. I believe in President Trump. I was in the trenches fighting for the America First agenda, and that's what I'm going to do in the United States Senate.
Thank you, Ms. Timken. Candidates, we do have another question to ask you about Donald Trump, and I do want to make clear we're going to give you all a chance to respond more fully in a moment. But first, it is a raise your hand question. The question is, do you think, as some high-level Republicans have suggested, that for the betterment of the Republican Party, it's time for Donald Trump to stop talking about the 2020 election and move on? If yes, if you think he should move on, raise your hand. Matt Dolan is the only one who has raised his hand. Mr. Vance, you're up first with this. You did not raise your hand. You have 30 seconds. Why?
For the simple reason that we have to get to the bottom of what happened in 2020, and we actually have to secure our democracy. Democrats always say they care about our democracy. Well, our constitutional republic was put under assault by two particular things that happened in 2020. The first is that Mark Zuckerberg, the founder of Facebook, spent $420 million to go up and buy local boards of elections. That should be illegal. It certainly changed the result in 2020. And number two, big tech censored stories about Hunter Biden's laptop. By the way, in conjunction and working in cahoots with the media, right? That affected the result in 2020. We've got to change that if we actually want to have a functional country.
Thank you, Mr. Vance. Matt Dolan, you're the only candidate on stage that did raise his hand. Why? You have 30 seconds.
Because elections are a state issue. In Ohio, we have very secure elections. There has been 2 audits done, and it showed there are no problems. As a Republican, we've got to take on the Biden administration. We've talked about gas prices, inflation, and insecurity and weakness in the world. That is what I'm going to Washington to focus on, to make sure that we stop the Biden agenda, but also set the agenda for what we as Republicans stand for, getting your jobs back, lowering your taxes, being strong in the world, defending our allies all over the world, including Taiwan.
Thank you, Mr. Dolan. Ms. Timken, same question to you. 30 seconds. You did not raise your hand. Why not?
Well, our democracy is at stake. And this is another example of the show horses versus the workhorse. As chair of the Republican Party, I worked with the Trump campaign and recruited over 300 attorneys and poll observers to be on the ground watching our 2020 election here in Ohio. In fact, I caught a Democrat operative pushing ballot harvesting and referred that person to the Attorney General. There is no doubt that the Democrats are threatening our democracy with their ballot harvesting and their bills to grab more power for Washington, D.C., and I'm going to stop them, just like I did in 2020.
Thank you, Ms. Timken. Josh Mandel, 30 seconds. You did not raise your hand.
There's only one candidate on this stage who will say what I'm about to say. And every time I say it, the liberal media gets triggered and the squishy rhino Republicans get triggered. But let me say it very clearly. I believe this election was stolen from Donald J. Trump. It was stolen from you and from me. They stole the election. We cannot move on from 2020 until we fully investigate and prosecute all the vote theft and cheating from the Democrats in the 2020 election.
Thank you, Mr. Mandel. Mike Gibbons, you also did not raise your hand. Why not? You have 30 seconds.
Well, you know, 5 million people there were 5 million more people voted in this last election than were registered to vote, and that's from the U.S. Census Bureau. There's a problem. The Democrats claim that any time you attack this election as being fraudulent, that you don't believe in democracy or hurting democracy. 50% of this country doesn't believe that this election was fair. Hurting democracy is not in fully investigating this. I will do that when I get to Washington. It has to be fully investigated.
Thank you, Mr. Gibbons. And candidates, we would like you now to look at the monitor. Wayne Dawson has been in touch tonight with our sister stations all over the state. He has a question for us. Wayne?
Thanks, Colleen. Our next question comes from our sister station, WDTN in Dayton. Here's anchor Brooke Moore.
This question has to do with transgender women competing in women's sports. Over the weekend, Ohio swimmers were among the many women who lost to transgender swimmer Leah Thomas in the NCAA championships. Leah was born a male but transitioned to a female. Leah complied with all transgender guidelines. Is the NCAA violating federal civil rights law by allowing her to compete as a woman?
So candidates, bottom line, did the NCAA violate federal law? Do transgender athletes require law changes?
And that question goes first to you, Mr. Dolan. You are up first, 60 seconds.
First, biological males should not be competing with biological females. So the NCAA got that wrong. This is a state's issue, and as a state senator, I would say, look, we have to make sure that we protect women's sports. And the way you do it, if a transgender athlete had competed in male sports, that's where the transgender athlete should continue to compete. We cannot have biological males competing against biological females. But this is a state's issue. And what concerns me about my opponents is they want to federalize a lot of issues. The 10th Amendment says if it's not enumerated in the Constitution, it is a state issue. They want to federalize elections. You just heard them talk about federalizing elections. They want to federalize education, and now they want to federalize these issues. These are best left to the states. The NCAA got it wrong. But I trust Ohio and the states to make sure that they get these laws right so that we have proper competition throughout our country.
Mr. Dolan, a quick follow-up, though, 15 seconds. Isn't this a federal Title IX issue?
The issue about whether a person can compete, a transgender athlete can compete in a women's sport, I would look to say, I think the state should say, if you have competed prior in a male sport, you are still allowed to compete in sports. But you're going to be a female competing in a male sport.
Thank you, Mr. Dolan. Ms. Timken, you're up next. You have 60 seconds.
Thank you. As a mom and a former college athlete, this is fundamentally unfair to have biological men competing against women. I'm a mom on a mission to take our country back, and this is a frontline issue for me. It is a federal issue. It is exactly Title IX that has been violated. This was to allow women to participate in sports. This is, again, the example of the woke Democrat policies. Transgenders should compete against transgender. Women should have the ability to compete on a fair level playing field. This, again, is wrong, and as a mom and a former athlete, I will stand up and fight back against it.
In just 15 seconds, is this an issue you would follow up on, pursue as senator, Title IX changes?
Absolutely. This is about fundamental fairness. It's about women's rights. And as a mom and a former college athlete and an aunt of an NCAA swimmer who is competing right now and has been competing, this is unfair. And I will stand up and fight for Ohio's women.
Mr. Mandel, we have the same question. Do transgender athletes require federal law changes? You have 1 minute.
Well, let me start off by saying this. The Democrat Party, they like to lecture us. Lecture all the conservatives watching on TV tonight, lecture all of us here about how good they are at science. Obviously, the Democrats don't know anything about science because they think there's 52 genders. Let's be real with each other. There's only 2 genders. Boys are boys, girls are girls. That's it. We should never allow boys to compete in girls' sports. We should never allow boys to be in our daughters' high school locker rooms. That's insane. And as a dad, and I know there's a lot of moms and dads out there who are girl dads and girl moms, and you have daughters. Like my daughter Rosie's 8 years old. If she dedicates herself and trains to be a star in soccer, and 10 years from now she's 18 and she's competing, all of a sudden some guy comes in who's 6'4", 220 onto the field, like, how is that fair to our daughters? This is insane. Ladies and gents, we have to go on offense against the radical left on this issue.
A quick follow-up. Would you then advocate for federal law changes such as Title IX?
Of course I would. I mean, listen, as a United States Senator, we should do everything we can to fight for our daughters and to fight for female athletes all over this country.
Thank you, Mr. Mandel. Mike Gibbons, same question to you. You have 60 seconds.
I've got a daughter that was a captain of her D1 soccer team, and she married a guy who played for the Cleveland Browns. I can't imagine them on the same field, and my daughter was a heck of a soccer player. It's ridiculous, and people are going to get hurt. We need to change it. I don't care if there's a transgender category and they compete among other transgenders, that's fine. But to have a male competing, a biological male competing against a biological female is ridiculous. Yes, there needs to be a change.
All right, thank you, Mr. Gibbons. And Mr. Vance, you are up with the final answer to this question, and you have 1 minute.
Yeah, so look, clearly there should be a federal change. It's ridiculous that biological males are competing with biological females in sports, and I say this as the father of a baby girl. My wife just had our first girl 3 months ago, and I kind of think it's really sad to think that she would work her entire life and have woke agendas from the Democratic Party take away her achievements and take away her sense that she's accomplished something. This also illustrates an important issue that's not just about Title IX of the Federal Civil Rights Act. It's about big tech, because I'd encourage all the viewers all across Ohio to go in and Google on their phones or on their computers, can a man become pregnant? And Google will tell you that the first response is, yes, men can become pregnant. In fact, it happens more often than you think. The technology industry, along with the Democrats, have pursued a radical idea of male and female. They've tried to create a bunch of different genders. They've tried to destroy the basic natural understanding of men and women. And if we don't go after the big tech companies, we might win a battle here or there, but the tech companies are going to destroy our notion of what it is to be a human being in this country. We got to fight back against them too.
Thank you, Mr. Vance. We're going to switch gears here, candidates. All of you have made statements during this campaign season that have gotten the attention of voters. We want to dig deeper into some of that, give you a chance to clarify some of those comments. In the interest of time, though, we do ask no rebuttals unless you're specifically called on. And Mr. Vance, this question goes to you up first. Last month, you wrote a column where you talked about restoring mutual trust and respect between our citizens and our leaders. But you've called our country's leaders, quote, idiots, scumbags, and more. Isn't that a contradiction? 60 seconds.
No, look, at the end of the day, a lot of our leaders are dumb, and a lot of our leaders have made very terrible decisions. To restore mutual respect, it's not about us having more respect for the leaders who are destroying this country. It's about our leaders having respect for their citizens, and our citizens having respect for one another. You know, no issue illustrates this more than the nonstop obsession with vaccine mandates. You saw it coming from, the corporate sector, the big multinationals. You saw it coming from the government as well. What happened to accepting that different people are going to make different decisions about what goes into their body? What happens to respecting one another as fellow citizens and knowing that your fellow citizens are going to do what's right by themselves, by their family, and by their community? We really have to get back to a country where instead of Big Brother telling us to do everything, what we eat, what we drink, what medical decisions we make, where we actually just respect one another and accept that maybe you're going to have one view about an issue, I'm going to have another view about an issue. Doesn't mean we can't share a country together, but that approach gets destroyed when leaders tell us what to do all the time.
Thank you, Mr. Vance. Mr. Gibbons, the next question goes to you. In a recent interview, you talked to me about the role of women and said something very specific about the only woman in this race. We're going to listen to that now.
Jane Timken, best I know, before she became deputy chair of the Stark County Republican Party, barely worked. I mean, it certainly got her money.
Now, in that same interview, you told me that you believe women have never been oppressed. More than half the women in this state, more than half the voters, are women. So what do you mean by those comments? You have 60 seconds.
Well, I guess I would start out by saying we made a lot of progress. In fact, in 2016, JD got to vote for a woman for president. It's a different world. We made great progress in this country. I'm very proud of the fact my son is a Navy pilot. His wife is an NCO on an F-18. I'm sorry, an NFO on an F-18. She's doing what men only did in the past. I'm very proud of that. We've made a great deal of progress, and I believe that there's a distinction between somebody putting money in a race where they make the money versus having it donated by somebody else.
But do you believe that women in this country have never been oppressed?
I think when they weren't allowed to vote, they were probably oppressed. But it was a different culture. It's like judging George Washington according to today's standards. My mother was the most honored person in our family. And if she wasn't, I had a problem with my father. The same with my grandmother. I think women had a different role. There were not a lot of women that were in combat in World War I or World War II. That was men's jobs at the time. But women were not subjected to that. So were men oppressed because they had to go to war? I don't know if oppressed is the right word. It was a different world, that's all.
All right, thank you, Mr. Gibbons. And Ms. Timkins, we are going to give you 15 seconds to respond because he obviously called you out in that clip.
Absolutely. And this is an example of the arrogance of Mike Gibbons, someone who's so out of touch, who doesn't understand that I started working when I was in grade school delivering newspapers and cleaned dorms in college. I was a practicing attorney and a magistrate and the first female chair of any political party in this state. Look, women have a voice, and I'm a mom on a mission to take our country back. We need leaders like me who understand the plight of families, who have been in the trenches fighting for the America First agenda. Mike Gibbons is out of touch.
All right, Ms. Tipkin, now we have a question that is directed to you. Your campaign is playing an ad that attacks several of the men who are on this stage tonight. We're going to play a portion of that now.
I'm Jane Timken. We all know guys who overcompensate for their inadequacies, and that description fits the guys in the Senate race to a T. Well, I'm different. I'm the MAGA conservative.
So how is that ad and the message in that ad any different than Mr. Gibbons' comments about your gender?
I was pointing out exactly what's going on in this race. You saw it on display on Friday night. Two candidates who were more concerned about themselves and their bloviating and their bravado. I'm in this race for Ohioans. This is a serious race, and it's a serious job. And I sometimes think we are allowed to have a little levity, but the point in this race is who can you trust to fight for the America First agenda? Who's been in the trenches fighting for President Trump's America First policies for border security, American jobs, and energy independence? I tell you, I put 150,000 miles on my car. I did not see Josh Mandel, Mike Gibbons, or J.D. Vance. I am the workhorse in this race. You've got a lot of show horses. Ohioans deserve someone who has the grit and grace to get things done.
Thank you, Ms. Timkins. And Mr. Gibbons, I know you would like to respond. 15 seconds.
First of all, I grew up in Parma, Ohio, and there were a lot of people that cleaned rooms, and nobody could put $2 million into a race. And I will tell you, I'm a little insulted. I would like to know what Jane would do when every question asked to Josh Mandel was turned on me, and he literally spouted falsehoods the entire time he got up there. I had a chance to respond. What would Jane have done if Josh Mandel had attacked him on the stage?
All right. Thank you, Mr. Gibbons.
You mean her on the stage?
I'm sorry, her.
Yes. Just another example of how out of touch you are, Mike.
We are going to move on, candidates. Mr. Mandel, this next question you're up. The question is for you. On October 24th, you tweeted, quote, "Shut down government schools and put schools in churches and synagogues." You've also said there's no such thing in your mind as the separation between church and state. You graduated from Beechwood High School and Ohio State. Are those two schools you'd like to shut down? You have 60 seconds.
Let me start off by just addressing that back and forth real quick between Mike and Jane. I've known Jane for a long time. We do not agree on all the issues, but she's a Harvard-trained attorney. She graduated from Harvard, worked at very challenging law firms doing complex cases, and so for Mike to say that Jane hasn't worked for a living, I think is insulting to Jane. As far as your question goes, I think the secular left is on an all-out assault against men and women of faith. Our country, it was based on a freedom of religion, not a freedom from religion. And our country grew strong on a bedrock of Judeo-Christian values, not Muslim values, not atheism, but Judeo-Christian values. And I think the ACLU, the liberal media, and even some of these squishy rhino Republicans, they're trying to take religion and faith out of everything. I don't think we should be watering down on those Judeo-Christian values. I think we should go the other direction. We should be doubling down. We should be instilling faith in the classroom, in the workplace, and everywhere in society.
To be clear, to follow up here, you did tweet, "Shut down government schools." Do you want to shut down Beechwood High School, Ohio State? Are there other government schools, to use your words, that you want to shut down?
Of course not, but I think we should make sure that taxpayer-funded schools, the kids are saying the Pledge of Allegiance. If the kids want to pray, they should be encouraged to pray, and we should be instilling faith in the schools, in the workplace, and as I said, in all aspects of society. We got to go on offense. For everyone watching at home, I know you're sick and tired of watching the secular left and the media attack us as men and women of faith. We got to fight.
Thank you, Mr. Mandel. Mr. Dolan, you are up next. On your website, you have said, "Few understand cancel culture more than me." Donald Trump accuses your family's organization of giving in to cancel culture when you changed the name of the Cleveland Indians. Did your family do the right thing? You have 1 minute.
Well, first let me address some things. My wife has a master's degree, so I respect women. But Jane, I have to tell you, you keep saying you're fighting in the trenches. Donald Trump won in 2016 by the exact same percentage that you keep claiming victory for in 2020. But under your watch, Republicans lost 3 Supreme Court races, and we're feeling the effects of that right now in Ohio. So I'm not sure what you actually did accomplish. Look, this is a family decision. My family made it. I'm going to stand by it. The reality is, as I say that, is because cancer culture right now is not changing anything. We're looking back to historical equity. We want to make sure that we create current and future opportunity for everyone. And when everyone is just fighting to look backwards and say, not everyone on the stage, I mean when Democrats are fighting to look backwards and say we need to correct history, how is that helping young men and women today? How is it saying that if you're in a poor school system, that's improving that school system? How is it if you're out of work and unskilled, how's that going to get you a trained job? The idea is that we have to focus on today and make sure that we put programs into place that help people get ahead. Do not rely on social engineering. We want to rely on economic opportunity for everyone.
Thank you,
I'm
Mr.
going to
Dolan.
address that.
And I do want to give you 15 seconds.
Yes.
He attacked you directly, so you can respond.
Absolutely. This is another example of all talk, no action. Matt Dolan, you're a senator today because I fought for your election. I accomplished that. I also, when we had a blue wave coming in 2018, we swept our statewide elected officials. We kept our congressional delegation, did the same in 2020, and I'm proud to say that I delivered Ohio for President Trump.
Thank you, Ms. Timken.
Jane, I
Time
went
is up.
door to door in a pandemic election, 6 hours a day for 6 months. I never once saw you walk on any doors.
I provided the
Thank
app
you both
you.
for that. We do want to move on. We are nearly out of time, so what we're going to do is a rapid-fire question here for all of you to answer in just 15 seconds. And the question for you is, if you are elected to the United States Senate, would you vote for Mitch McConnell as the Senate Republican leader? We will start with you, Ms. Timken.
Yes. I'm in this fight for the America First policies. We need people who have a backbone to go to the United States Senate and stand up for Ohio's families. Look, I will decide who is running for leadership. I will vote for whoever I think will be best to fight for those America First policies, as I did to support President Trump.
All of us have been asked this question hundreds of times. We're not going to entertain hypotheticals. I mean, this is a trap question from the liberal media. Who's running against him? Let me ask you that. Who's his opponent?
Senator Rick Scott of Florida is someone who has put forth a plan.
He didn't announce. So it's like the media, this is what the liberal media does. They try to trap conservatives. They try to pit conservatives against conservatives. Listen, don't fall for this. Like, this is why when Donald Trump said the fake news, he was right. And listen, George Bush didn't call him out. His dad, George Bush Sr., didn't call him out. No Republican in my lifetime called him out. The fake news is the fake news. Do not fall for them.
Thank you, Mr. Mandel. Mr. Gibbons, would you support Mitch McConnell as the Republican leader in the Senate?
You tell me who he's running against, I'll give you an answer.
Good answer.
I am a constitutional conservative without apology. I will find somebody that reflects my values, and I will vote for them.
J.D. Vance, Mitch McConnell says he intends to be the Republican leader. It'll be one of the first votes you take if elected to the Senate. Do you know how you'll vote?
Yeah, look, I think one of my favorite quotes about American politics is that we have an evil party in Washington called the Democrats and a stupid party in Washington called the Republicans, and every now and then they get together and do something that's both stupid and evil, and they call it bipartisanship. I think at the end of the day, I want to elect a majority leader of the U.S. Senate who's actually going to stand for our citizens first, who's not going to bow to the mob. Like everybody said, I don't even know who's running.
Matt Dolan, same question to you.
I'm going to vote for the leader who's going to understand that I'm there to fight for Ohio, and if he expects me to do anything else but do what I think is in the best interest of Ohio and the best interest of America, then he's got the wrong guy. I'm also going to make sure that we have process back in Washington. No more late-night bills, no more current resolutions. We've got to get back to budgeting.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Dolan.
Well, candidates, it has been a quick night, believe it or not. It is time now for closing statements.
And we're going to go in reverse polling order for that. So we start with Ms. Timken. You are up first, and as agreed upon, you have 30 seconds.
Thank you. I'm a mom on a mission to take our country back, to fight for the America First policies of energy independence, a strong, secure border, peace through strength. I have been in the trenches fighting for the America First policies. President Trump trusted me, endorsed me to become chair of the Ohio Republican Party, and I delivered. This is about who you trust, and for me, this is about delivering the American dream that is at risk because of the Democrats' failed policies. You have a choice to make. Do you want a show horse or a workhorse, someone with the grit and grace to get things done in Washington, D.C.? I ask for your vote.
Thank you, Ms. Timken. Matt Dolan, you're up next, 30 seconds.
Thank you. As I said, this race is about Ohio. So Cincinnati, I'm the only one that got your back on Brent's Bridge. I know what it means to your economy. Appalachia, I've worked with the Appalachian Foundation to make sure we bring broadband because I know what it means to your economy, to your health care, and to your education. All throughout the state, I have been fighting for what's best for Ohio. I am the only one that can point to a real record of conservative results, less taxes, less regulations, backing the police. I want to bring that same conservative results to Washington because for too long, we haven't got enough done.
Thank you, Mr. Dolan. Mr. Vance, 30 seconds for your closing.
Look, elites in this country have gotten rich by plundering the greatest country in the world and accumulating more power for themselves. And if normal people dare complain about it, they call us racist, they call us xenophobic, they call us bad people. We need to stop it. We need people with courage to go to Washington to actually fight for our values. We need people who actually raise families here, who have built businesses here. I'm doing both of those things right now in the state of Ohio. And look, what I want, it's really simple. I want to grow up in a country where my young sons are encouraged to become virtuous men. That cannot happen if the radical left takes control. We've got to fight back for the sake of our kids.
Thank you, Mr. Vance. Josh Mandel, you have 30 seconds.
I'm going to use my 30 seconds to talk about an issue that I'm shocked did not come up tonight, and it's something I'm so passionate about. Stopping abortion. Protecting life from conception to natural death. When I go to Washington, the unborn, the dignity of life, will have no more fierce fighter than me. And when I go to Washington to protect life, to protect the unborn, to protect our babies, I will fight. And I will fight with two documents in hand, with the Bible in one hand and the Constitution in the other.
Thank you, Mr. Mandel. Mr. Gibbons, your final comments?
I'm a businessman, not a politician, and I'm a constitutional conservative without apology. I was born on West 77th Street in Cleveland, Ohio. I started with nothing, and I've achieved the American dream. I want your children to be able to achieve that same American dream. And I don't think we can entrust our future of this country to career politicians, party insiders, or people that put their finger in the air when they want to find out what they're going to say next. I believe in America first. I believe in the sanctity of human life. I believe in the right to keep and bear arms.
Thank you, Mr. Gibbons.
And we thank all of you for participating tonight in this important political debate.
And we do want to remind all of you to vote in the Ohio primary. Let's go back now to Wayne Dawson.
Thank you very much, and a very, very special thank you to everyone at home for watching tonight. One note before we leave you, we made the same offer to the qualified Democratic candidates for the Ohio Senate to debate. Stay with your local Nexstar media station for continuing coverage. From your local elections headquarters, good night from Cleveland.